Good morning and welcome to the new edition of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. Every country formulates its foreign policy, and normally the foreign policy does not change with a change in the political party in power because foreign policy is something which is not party dictated but is country dictated. It is always related to the advancement of the country socially, economically, and is an effective means to enhance your power, prestige, and trade benefits. So, when the political parties change, there is an apparent show of change in policy, but in reality, it's not. The latest example you can see President Trump's anti China strike is not being diluted by Joe Biden. He is, in fact, more strident anti China than even Trump was. And that is the fact of diplomacy. That you change outwardly, but you do not change your inherent basics. But now all signs in India point towards a major calibration of Indian foreign policy. The ship is changing its course. The foreign policy compasses in recent weeks, more especially recently. It wasn't there for the last 5 years, but now we see that the theme of countering China and a tendency towards the ascendance, the rise of the political Islam are the two major factors. But then India has a huge Muslim population, so it is very diplomatic. And here India has been pretty successful, I would say. They have changed their policy, and for the first time, the Organization of the Muslim countries did not condemn India for its stance on Kashmir. Only three countries were there which are condemning India, and they were perpetual condemner, Pakistan, aided by another co-partner of Pakistan, Turkey, co-partner in the sense that this is a second country which has been put on the terror financing list. And the third, of course, is Malaysia. The historical experience of India has been that India has always been regarded to be the moral custodian of the world. But then recently something very odd happened, and that is the news regarding an international conference on Afghanistan to be held in the second week of November. And India is planning to host it. Already Putin has hosted where he invited India. Already there is a trio which is monitoring the Afghan situation, and now India. And this is a very unconventional route being taken with priority on optics. Here the reality is that it's just optics. In reality, there's nothing below the surface, and that is justified. Can you believe it's to be held in the second week of November? Until now, nobody knows the key participants. Nobody knows the exact conference date, and such conferences, international conferences, have to be determined much ahead so that the persons attending it can adjust their programs accordingly. But then key participants reportedly include two neighbors of India, Pakistan and China. And with both the neighbors, India's ties remain frozen. It's already cold coming up. And then another thing, it's a major, major change. People are not realizing it. This is that Indian National Security Council is organizing it, not the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So the Indian Security Council is wading into regional diplomacy. Normally, this is the domain of the External Affairs Minister, but here Ajit Doval has upstaged the Foreign Minister. The compass that the Indian organization is organizing and holding its final destination to the uncertain voyage that is travel is unclear. Indeed, in this conference, going to be about Afghanistan at all, or is it going to be about a reset of relations with China and Pakistan? Because these two countries are definitely going to be invited. And there is no clarity yet whether Taliban officials would be invited. Although, if the Taliban are not invited, the event would become something like a Hamlet without a Prince of Denmark. But, as I said earlier, till now things are not clear who is going to be invited. Taliban, yes or no. Of course, USA would be there. That brings to the major question. Is this not an evidence that India is changing its course? The answer is ambivalent. It's both yes and no. All signs point towards a major recalibration of the foreign policy. And especially so since 2 months after Afghanistan's hectic change, sudden change, leading to the formation of the Taliban government in Afghanistan. So, to connect the incipient signs so far, the way forward in Afghanistan, India has opted to align with the Anglo-American camp. Now, here again is a shift. India has always been pro-Russia. But this time there are two sides, clearly. There is the Anglo-American camp, and the other side is Eurasian axis. And Eurasian axis is Russia, China, Iran. Here India has our debate, because Russia is our perpetual friend, and to oppose Russia or to align with USA as against Russia, I think it should have remained unaligned. That would have been fine. But align with USA, who is not a dependable ally, who would always be more in favor of a dictatorship rather than supporting democratic India. We have 1971 experience. So this Eurasian axis of Russia, China and Iran. I know China is enemy. I know Iran is not very friendly now after Chabar port incident. And USA has an attitude, either you are with us or against us. So this is a very, shall I say, ambivalent policy for India vis-a-vis Taliban, Russia, China, Iran and other neighbor states. Because they give primacy to stability and security of Afghanistan and the region. And if India misses here, it misses a major chunk. Being discontented party, surprisingly, I'm not denying that India would have more in common with the revisionist powers USA and UK, but that temporary satisfaction should not, in diplomatic world, overwhelm the reality, the long term. This is a very short term. But if I look at the things, all the protagonists, and of course, while the signpost is marking Afghanistan, it is not only Afghanistan, it's a journey ahead. Let's not forget, Afghanistan is important only as a signpost. It's a symbol, but it's much more. As a matter of fact, it's epochal one that transforms the geopolitics of the whole region. Afghanistan is symptomatic of the geopolitical situation of the whole Asian, South Asian, Eurasian area. And India as a rising power should have a major stake. From that point of view, the proposed conference is welcome. But Delhi moving up the center stage of the Quad has also its implication. Now there are two Quads. And here India has been very, very intelligent. When they signed up with Israel and UAE, cutting off from Iran that way. So Washington has accepted that Quad ought to be inclusive. Why? In fact, France and England want to jump in. But would their jumping in not destroy the character of Quad? That's important. Now, on its part, Delhi has displayed its comfort level in very clear terms with AUKUS. AUKUS is Australia movement with USA and UK. Broadly, the historical Western experience of European Union and of NATO is that they work independently of each other. And notionally they are independent, but they have a shared purposeful collision and geopolitical objectives to weaken a common enemy. Now that is being replicated with the Asian practice. A dual containment strategy is unfolding against China and Russia. That doesn't offend India because India stands to gain. But again, this is shedding the essential part of the Indian democracy and Indian diplomacy. That is shedding its Chanakyan ambivalence. Thus, a short-lived dalliance, love affair with Iran is losing its gravity, its importance. And India now is swinging to the other extreme and identifying the new Quad what they talked about in West Asia, Israel, UAE and USA. So USA is a common factor both in the Quad where Japan and Australia are there and the Quad where Israel and UAE are there. Therefore, when it comes to Afghanistan, it doesn't really matter anymore whether Russia accommodates India in the Moscow format or it invites India in the privileged grouping known as Troika Plus. Now, Troika Plus is USA, China, Pakistan. They have been invited by Russia. Even Delhi has been invited by Russia, but Delhi has been invited as a secondary player, not as a part of the Troika. So, the result, Delhi got jitters. They shrugged their shoulders at the time-tested friend Moscow because Moscow is not in favor of Quad ultimately. Because they think that Quad and AUKUS are deliberate attempts to undermine the existing political order. And this astonishing zigzag, serpentine move by India is really, really something. I won't call it amazing. History is a clear witness to this thing. Russia signed a peace agreement with Hitler, Ribbentrop-Stalin agreement. And within 3 months of that, Germany had invaded Russia. But this astonishing zigzag in Indian regional policy is virtually making people breathless. The External Affairs Minister Jaishankar has to admit that Indian foreign policy, a variation of fundamental theme of countering the rise of China. You cannot deny it. India is avoiding Troika Plus, or rather it will participate but not with the same enthusiasm, and as a counterbalance it's organizing its own conference. Now there is a sneaking doubt that maybe this is being prompted by USA. And let me tell you, whether USA is prompting it or not, Israel definitely has a role to play in that. In the near terms, though, this wild swing of the pendulum of the clock is going to be keenly felt all over the world. People are going to think, well, what happened to the non alignment? What happened to the moral superiority that India used to talk about? But India lives in the region, they forget. And it's a pragmatic need to change the policy. I'm no lover of the sudden changes, but I'm a lover of pragmatism. And that means that we have to assert India's supremacy and to ensure that India beats economically, politically, China, then it has to assert itself. Now, there's a problem which people forget when they criticize. India lives in this region, it's a part of the region. US is not. Australia is not. Israel is not. Iran is not. But India is. China is. Pakistan is. So, Quad and AUKUS would be no help to India when it comes to Afghanistan. But the new Quad would, because Iran would be more concerned with countering Israel. So it would not be attracted towards this. Now, as far as the Hindu Kush area is concerned, Pakistan and China are riding high. Let's not deny it. We always say Pakistan is weak, but no, it's riding high in Hindu Kush. Now, another thing is, Moscow and Beijing have erected a Maginot line in the Central Asia. And Washington is trying its level best to breach that line, but it cannot do it without the help of India. At one time, India was the most influential country in Kabul. It's no longer so. So if you think that you have got impact in Afghanistan because of your spending $3 billion, forget it. It is delusional to think that India can have any impact in Afghanistan. And I've seen people saying that we should be humanitarian, whether we love Afghanistan or not, we should help them. And they always say, well, it's our next door neighbor. And as I always say, you cannot choose your neighbor, but you can always choose how to deal with a neighbor. Meanwhile, another thing has happened. It's a new vector. And that's the impact of the ascendancy of the political Islam. I'm not talking about militant. Now, let me be very clear. You have got to differentiate between the militant Islam and political Islam. And the political Islam in India's immediate neighborhood, whether it's Taliban, and Taliban is preferable to ISK, Pakistan, or even Bangladesh, the recent killing of the Hindus, is basically a not militant Islam, it's a political Islam. But this is going to affect India's internal dynamics on the security front and also on the election cycle looming ahead. Now, ultimately, charity begins at home. Any political party would not mind making even a revolutionary change in the policy if it can help maintain its hold on power. Now, look at the one thing which has happened, which people are throwing low. They say, well, NSA, National Security Advisor, is becoming predominant. Yes. But look at the problem we have created for Pakistan. Suffice to say that National Security Advisor of Pakistan has a problem. Moeed Yusuf faces a Hobson's choice. He's damned if he accepts Ajit Doval's invite and comes to India, especially when Kashmiris reject the abrogation of Jammu and Kashmir special status. And India has not even cared to hide its toxic hostility towards Pakistan. So, if he comes, it means that they accept it. And poor Yusuf, he's damned if he turns down. because in the international community it would be seen that Indian offer of peace and a new leaf has been spurned, rejected by Pakistan. So Pakistan is going to be the difficult neighbor, not India. I think Ajit Doval did sensible thing. It was a brainwave to invite Pakistan counterpart Yusuf to the conference, especially where Delhi has to create an equivalent of, the ancient Vedas talk of Vajra Yudh. Vajra was the ultimate weapon, which allowed even Indra, Lord Indra, the ancient deity in Hinduism, to reclaim its rightful place. So Vajra Yudh, India is following. So there is a shift from Chanakya to Vedic philosophy. And the purpose is to reclaim the rightful place in the Afghan pantheon of gods and demigods. So this circumambulation is in fact putting Pakistan in a very difficult position. Now make no mistakes. When I talk of Vedas and the demigods, there is no divinity in all this. Because India is fighting Islamic militant Islam as well as political Islam. And then to motivate, they talk of dharma and the universe. It makes eminent sense that chairing the conference would be Ajit Doval, not Jaishankar. For Doval, the stunning setback in Afghanistan ought to be temporary. And let me tell you, Ajit is no idealist. He doesn't work under illusions. And he's very realistic, very pragmatic. He has lived in work which is red in tooth and claw. Certainly, he doesn't have the luxury of intellectualizing. That's a battle must be won. He believes in winning the battle. Either out straight, fine, either fight the battle and win it, or by denying the fruit of victory to the opponents. And this putting Pakistan as well as China in a quandary. Do they accept it and accept the predominant position of India, or do they reject it and become pariahs themselves? So this shifting of the Indian foreign policy is really quite an interesting diplomatic game being played very well by Ajit, and of course in consultation with Jaishankar, with the blessings of Modi in the background. But this trio is making revolutionary changes based on the needs of the time.